Yes.
Okay, there we go. It's on now. Okay, so today's session is on two-stage assessments. It's going to be a introduction to the basics for those of you who don't exactly know what two-stage assessments are. I think we took a survey of where you're at, and you're all at quite different levels. So we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to share our own, that timing on the basics is a bit wrong, by the way. We're going to have a panel where we each share our own experiences using two-stage assessments in the classroom. We're going to break out, have a discussion as a big group where you can ask questions to the panel, we can discuss. And we're also going to have a breakout groups where we discuss in smaller groups. And then finally, we're going to come back, share what we discussed, wrap up, and also we're going to share some resources with you. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, you're welcome to type them into the chat, and someone's going to be keeping an eye on those. We'll try to address them as we go. Okay, so two-stage assessments is exactly what it sounds like. It's an assessment that has two separate parts, stage 1 and stage 2. In stage 1, it's usually called the individual stage. Students are given an individual assessment that they would write like a normal test. It could be a quiz, it can be an exam, and it can be in any format. In the second stage, which is designed to follow immediately after the individual stage, students repeat the same or part of the same test in groups, and they resubmit their answers as a group as opposed to as individuals. There are different ways you can do it. It doesn't have to be identical. Some people do them as more challenging questions but related to the questions, but often they are identical questions to the individual format. So this is a course flow to show you how a two-stage assessment would be enacted in the classroom, whether online or in person. So out of class, the instructor's job is to create the test, obviously, or the quiz. In class is distributed to the students individually. The students write it. When they're done writing, they form small groups. There's different ways you can form the groups. We can discuss that. The TAs or the instructor collects the individual results and distributes the grouped portion of the test, and then the groups write that. And at the end, the TAs or the instructor collect the group portions of the test, take it, mark it, provide feedback. I'm going to give you just very brief intro to how you might, the logistics of how this works. So with grading, there's two components. One thing that most people do is they don't let the group grade be lower than the individual grade. So if the individual student actually performs better individually than the group does, most teachers will give them only their individual grade and not count the group grade. So they're never brought down by their group grade. I personally find this doesn't happen often, but it does happen. So it's important to have that built into your grading scheme. If it's a low stakes assessment, it's pretty common to go 50% for the individual, 50% for the group, where if it's high stakes, most people choose to go 85-15. These aren't rules, this is just what I've seen done and is most commonly done. On the group part, it's also common to use what are called if-at cards. I've got a picture of one over to the right. It's a very specific tool, but there are ways to simulate it online. The idea is that when they're answering the questions, if it's a multiple choice question, that the group knows whether or not they got the answer right immediately. So for example, if they think the answer on this card, they thought the answer to the first one was A, they scratched it, they see there's no little star hiding there. They're like, oh, we got it wrong. Okay. So they try a second try. They pick C. They see that there's a star. That means, oh, I got it right. Great. We can move on to the next question. Okay, so they're getting immediate feedback on their answers. If you take this approach, whether it's online or actually with the physical cards, the most common grading scheme for it is that you keep reducing by half the number of points they get. So 100% if they get it right the first time, 50% if they get it right the second try, 25% if they get it right the third try, and then generally 0 after that. As for timing the 2 stages, again, these are just suggestions, what is most commonly done. For low stakes quizzes, it's often divided 50% individual, 50% group. But if it's a high stakes final exam or a midterm, people often choose to do 2/3 for the individual and 1/3 of the time for the group. And you have to be careful and make sure you allow for the time for students to move into groups and for you guys to collect and distribute the 2 stages as opposed to just one. We also wanted to just explain why you would bother doing this. So there are a lot of benefits, and it's been researched, and there is literature on the final slide that you'll be able to look at if you want to see the data on this. Some of the panelists are also going to show their data. But the idea is you can teach while you test. The test doesn't have to be purely summative. It can also be a formative experience. Students can keep learning while they test through this format, while they're tested, I should say. So the research has shown that students do demonstrate increased learning gains. Okay, part of the reason, part of the explanation for this seems to be the role of getting immediate feedback. So we all know the experience when our students write a test. As soon as they leave the classroom, they're super excited. They talk to each other. They want, what did you get? What did you put? Oh no, I can't believe I said this. So they get a chance to, instead of gathering outside and discussing like that, they actually get to try it again and discuss in the classroom. They get to work on their collaborative skills, something that is a soft skill we're all supposed to be teaching our students. And the atmosphere of a 2-stage exam is quite different than a regular exam, and it seems to reduce the stress that students feel going into the exam, during the exam, and after the exam. One other really important benefit of the 2-stage exam is this, the discussion and interaction between the students that goes on in the exam that you would never normally get. It lets students engage in this really important identity work, which is really, we want our students to become members of their community of practice of our discipline. And this is one way we can help achieve that. It makes students use the discipline's language. They have to argue their case and listen to others. They have to sometimes take the role of expert, and they're getting recognition from other people as they discuss their ideas. So it's a really important process, one you would never think you could actually do during an assessment. So that concludes the introduction to what a 2-stage assessment is. Now we're going to, each panelist is going to share how we have used 2-stage assessments in our own classes. Is there any questions appearing in the chat? Can anyone see? I can't, because I'm screen sharing, I can't actually see them.
Yeah, there are questions but they're also being answered. So
okay, just let me know if there's something. Interrupt, okay, perhaps.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're all going to see the questions at the same time. So in my own teaching, I use 2-stage quizzes on a daily basis in my class. So I do daily review quizzes. Before 2-stage assessments came into my life, I just did a standard quiz. The students would write on paper, submit, that was that. It was about 20 minutes at the start of almost every class. The idea was to get them reviewing what they did the class before. It was always on exactly what we did the class before, including any homework they were supposed to have completed. And it was supposed to kind of get them ready for what we were about to learn next. And then I heard about 2-stage assessments from a couple of my colleagues, Paul Basileus and Michael Dugdale, and I saw how they were using them in their classes, and I jumped on board and I haven't looked back. So I implement them as follows. I do 3 conceptual multiple choice questions is always the same. I've done it in person and online. I think I'll discuss online since that's the most pertinent this semester. I have students complete them individually, and I just give them a quiz. It looks like the one on the right. So I've done it through Long Kappa, and I'm switching to Moodle. I know other colleagues have done them through Moodle. So I just give a generic quiz questions, the best answer for number 1, the best answer for number 2, the best answer for number 3. It keeps it very simple. And I distribute the actual quiz questions as like a PDF sharing. The students complete them individually in about 15 minutes, and then it shifts automatically through the learning management system, for example, Moodle, to the group stage. So as soon as they go into their groups, they redo the exact same quiz. My teams are permanent. They work in these teams on many activities throughout the semester, so they're very comfortable with each other. The quizzes are just one of the things they do in their groups. And another thing I found really helpful when doing these on a daily basis, is different if you're doing it for a summative exam, is to have the next activity be something that each group can start whenever they finish, because they do finish at different times in their groups. Some groups are very fast and some groups need more time. So if you can have it, your first activity following your quiz ready to go, students know where to find it and they can just get started and not waste time. It's very handy. I use the if-at cards, or I use the Moodle or Long Kappa grading system to do the same thing, reducing the grades for every try, and so they know when they get it right. I'm going to just end my section with what I think is probably one of the most important things if you're thinking of using two-stage exams, and that is to design your questions well. Not just any question is useful. If they can do the question by themselves and there's no point having a discussion, then it's not really a good two-stage exam question. You want the question to stimulate useful discussion, so it does lead to learning, perhaps even argument. You don't want to make it purposefully hard or misleading, like a tricky question where students get the bad vibe from the question. It should be an honest question that could be challenging and stimulates this discussion. There might even not be an obvious answer. There's so many different ways you can do it, but if you pay attention to the questions, you can design a really great two-stage exam. Our next panelist is Alice. So Alice, you can just tell me when you want me to advance the slide.
Thank you, Phoebe. Yes, so I use, so I'm a chemist and I teach both general chemistry and organic chemistry. And I have used two-stage exams, again, with the so-called if-at cards a while back, a couple of years ago when I was teaching, sorry, an introductory cell biology course. And it was a multiple choice. And it was used for term tests. We had like mini tests. We had about 5 of them during the term. But the more interesting part that I would like to discuss a little bit more with you today is two-stage exams in organic chemistry. So two-stage exams in organic chemistry started as a little bit of a need. My classes were not doing well. My averages were very low. Students, I just needed to do something else in class to feel that the students are being are following the material and are being more involved. I use the two-stage exam in organic chemistry for my 2 term tests or 3 term tests, depends. My class is usually at about 100 students, 90 to 100 students. It's not multiple choice, so it's all long written questions. And I start with the individual part. I go on then to the group part, and the group part does not have necessarily questions that they have seen before, but it follows on a question that was in the individual part, and it's a little bit more involved and it leads to discussion. For those that, and we're going to discuss this a little bit later in the presentation, but for those that are concerned that this takes time during teaching or takes time out of your teaching, yes, I did give evening exams. They were from 6 to 8 p.m. so I did not have to give up class time. It also helped with the accommodations. If you have students that need special accommodations, again, this will be discussed later. But our accommodation is usually for the individual part. We never had asked, we were never, I mean, I was never asked for accommodations for the group component. Overall, after giving group exams, our failure rate was reduced, and it was the low achieving students that had a higher percentage as an overall grade. One other thing that I would like to address is preparing them for the group component. As you know, students, there can be apprehension. There can be apprehension, oh my God, we're doing something different. How is this going to help me? So what I have done is I have used visual classrooms as a preparation tool for the group exam. I will show you a couple of the student comments, and then I will briefly talk about visual classrooms for those of you who want to know more about it. And we can always contact me later, or we can talk in the breakout session. So if we can go to the student comments, Phoebe, if you don't mind. So very few comments. What I have done after the group exam is we have had, we call it the post-it note, the post-it method. We gave each student 2 post-its, one of them for a positive comment, one of them for a negative comment, or pros or cons. Honestly speaking, we had very few cons. The only thing that they didn't really like was that the exam was in the evening, but they understood why. And then everybody was just in love with the new method. And as you can see over here, they recognize that the group part allows them to see their mistakes. They like combining their forces, joining forces. They found it realistic to work in groups. They like, again, learning from other students. Some students told me that it's almost like private tutoring or like group tutoring. They're really, so they were very excited, not only about the fact that yes, it can improve their grade, but also about they connected to the learning that's happening. If just very briefly, since I think we're okay in time, I very briefly want to talk to you about visual classrooms. And visual classrooms is a web platform that supports collaboration and discussion. And I have started using visual classrooms at the same time that I started using the 2-stage exam, because I used visual classroom, as I mentioned, as a preparation for the group part of the exam. So the idea in visual classroom is that I post a question, and then every student answers the question, and everybody in the group, and you can set your groups how large you want, everybody in the group sees the answer to the question, and then they get to comment on how the question was answered, and they get to judge how the question was answered. So what we're trying to do over here is we're trying to move away from the idea of students looking constantly for an answer in a solution manual or in the book or somewhere, and trying to trust each other as a source of knowledge, trying to establish this relationship of, yes, this is a student, they're my colleagues, but encourage the back and forth, encourage them to talk to each other about this, and trust each other that they are solving it correctly. So this was used as a preparation for the group part, because in the group part of the exam, they will have to rely on each other, and they will have to rely on each other's knowledge. So I put this up here just so you know how I went about the preparation. Visual Classroom was then used very much this semester as for the online course. I did not do 2-stage exam in my online classes yet, but I am further developing this idea of trust your fellow colleagues, if you want, in visual classrooms. Now we're going to make students give feedback to each other, and they're being graded on the feedback. So I have worked a little bit with Phoebe on this, and with Saltese, and we're moving in that direction, hoping that once we're going back on campus, then we can use somehow Visual Classroom as a real component of our 2-stage exam. we can move on to our next panelist. Thank you.
That's the classic problem, isn't it? Oops, you're on mute. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Alice and Phoebe, for such a great introduction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience. My name is Martha. I'm an instructor at Carleton University, and I have used two-stage assessments in a couple of different ways. So I have used them in an in-person course that I teach. In summative assessments, so the students did this, wrote them as their midterms, and they had mostly short answer questions. So I sort of did that thing where the hardest questions were on the group part, and the students worked on those parts of the questions in the second part of the exam. And I would reiterate what both Phoebe and Alice have said. I mean, I think that it's really important that you have low stakes or no stakes activities that support collaboration well before anyone is in an assessment situation, so they can trust each other, so they start to see the benefit of the experience. I have also collected some student perspective data in that case. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I've been doing in my courses last year. Was I did this thing, what I call them diagnostic quizzes. So it's a quiz that the students do a couple of days before the midterm. And I presented to them as an opportunity to clarify your understanding, focus your exam studying, find out the maybe 3 things that you really need to spend your time on. And also my goal is to help them activate metacognition, right? Become aware of what they know or don't know, and then be able to take action based on that information. And so I'll show some data to you about what we found from that. And then this past semester in the fall, I tried to do some diagnostic quizzing online, and it was not very successful. And I think it really had to do with sort of the teaching design parts on my end. It wasn't mandatory, so we didn't have a lot of people showing up. That was definitely a barrier. And you know, we had this learning curve of starting to really understand how those online tools work, and how we could incentivize attendance and support people to come and actually participate. So we've redesigned it. We're going to try it again this semester, and I think it's going to go more smoothly. In the chat, there was a conversation briefly about what kinds of tools are you using. So I was using the LMS, in my case, Moodle, for the individual quiz, and then the students would meet online in a Zoom room, like in a Zoom breakout room, and use this tool called the GRAT, and I can never remember what the letters stand for, but it's essentially the person who designed it, what their goal was to make an online group if-at tool. So one of the benefits is you get that immediate feedback component. So when the students choose the correct answer, the letters, they change to green. Group readiness assurance testing. Thank you, Jackie. That acronym doesn't stick with me. And so they get that immediate feedback, which is one of the benefits. And I would recommend, if the way that we got access to the tool was just by writing directly to the author of the tool, who immediately shared it with my student, and she found it quite easy to use and to implement. So it's pretty easy to use. Can I get the next slide, please, Phoebe? So here's a little bit of data. We've got 3 classes at the bottom. It's all second-year courses, and 1 second-year course in microbiology, 1 second-year course in animal form and function, and then a second-year course in plant form and function, where we have the 2 midterms. So the midterm M1 and M2, midterm 1 and midterm 2. And what you can see across there is the average mark for students in the dark bars. Those are students who did write the diagnostic quiz. And the average mark in the lighter bars are students who did not write the diagnostic quiz, and what their average mark was on the midterm, right? Because the quiz is supposed to sort of activate you for preparing for the midterm, help you to become aware of what you know, what you don't know, maybe to help you do some targeted studying. And what we found across the board is that the students who participated in the diagnostic quiz with the individual and group component, they did better on the midterms. Now, there's some confounding variables, because one of the things is these ones were all done in person. So we could be identifying students who come to class, right? people who come to class maybe just do better. But we have a really big sample here. So each of these classes has sort of 200 to 250 students in it. And so I guess we have some confidence that there's something quite positive about this two-stage testing as a way to help students get ready for the individual assessment. And last slide, please, Phoebe. And when we asked them about what was it like to participate in the two-stage testing, some funny things have happened to my fonts. They say, one of the things that they say a lot is that it helped to give me a clearer picture of the types of questions to expect on the midterm, making my studying more detailed and precise. I had an idea of how well I knew the material and how much other people knew. And then this person felt that that meant that they had to step up, but that is a kind of metacognition, right? Becoming aware of, like, the field is this big and my understanding is this big, right? Maybe compared to my peers, or just a different sense of where my understanding lines up with what maybe the total understanding could be. And another thing, this is a comment I think is really insightful for the student. Some topics I thought I knew well, but I struggled with in the diagnostic quiz. I made sure to put some extra time into studying those before the midterm. So then really we're achieving exactly what we were hoping for, right? That they become aware of what they don't know, and they become aware sort of at a moment in time where they're incentivized to figure out that content so that they're ready for the midterm. So this is one way that I have used the two-stage tests, and I'm happy to discuss further. I'm going to pass it over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Martha. And I think after me, we'll have some open questions. So you can post your questions in the chat or save them until that time. So as mentioned before, I'm in a department of chemistry, and so I have used these two-stage assessments most often in chemistry, organic chemistry, also introductory chemistry. And one use that has been described in this paper here is about a start of term review. So our science teaching and learning fellow, Jane Maxwell, worked with another person, Lisa McDonnell, and also Carl Wyman during the Carl Wyman Science Education Initiative to put forth this idea that we often review at the start of a new term by lecturing again. We explain what students are supposed to remember from their previous course. What happens when we do that is students probably don't pay that great of attention because they think they know the content already. But when using a two-stage activity or assessment, it could be, not even for marks, it helps them understand what they may have forgotten or misunderstood from the previous course, and also helps them learn from that group discussion. So personally, I've only used this once in my organic chemistry course so far, but it was a really great way to review the key concepts from general chemistry that I wanted students to remember. It was also much more efficient. So I could do a two-stage review in one class instead of, re-explaining content for 3 classes that might be necessary. Also for the standard midterm exams and quizzes, whether that's, 5-term quizzes, things like that. And then more recently, I've been thinking about two-stage assessments in this online world that we're in now. So one experience that I've had is supporting my colleague, Dr. Jay Wickenden, in doing this in his large organic chemistry course in the summer. So actually, we have 1,200 students in our regular winter course. In the summer, when we started this, we just had 400. So we kind of tested it out with about 400, and then he used them this fall with 1,200 students at a time. And how he did that, or the technology that was used, is an LMS. So we use Canvas, so an LMS quiz. He used a software called GradeScope for the written questions that were done on a printed PDF and then uploaded, and then Zoom breakout rooms for the actual group interaction part where students could talk together and screen share and so on and so forth. We've experimented in this online course with random groups. We also experimented with students selecting their own groups, and I can talk more about that later if that's something you're interested in. For my course that just happened in the fall, which was an introductory chemistry, course. I had just over 100 students, and my approach was to also use Zoom breakout rooms for the group interaction, but to have the groups collaboratively edit a document. So this is really commonly done with Google Docs, and we're actually going to do that in the session today. I used Microsoft Teams as a way to do this since it's supported by my institution and FIPA compliant, and we were already using it for class activities. I assigned the groups, and I worked with persistent groups. So at the start of term or near the start of term, I constructed groups that students would do the class activities in. And then for the midterm exam, they did the exam with that group. And then I constructed new groups for a change about halfway through the term. And then that's who they wrote the final exam two-stage assessment with. So of course, with our final exam time slots, ours are 2.5 hours. To do the group part meant I did write a shorter or create a shorter exam so that we had time to do the group stage. But I did select only the questions that really made sense to discuss, that I thought students could benefit from a discussion. So that's kind of like what Phoebe was saying earlier, is you can kind of pick and choose and create that experience that you think will be most effective. I didn't feel it was necessary to have them discuss questions that were really hard to represent in a Word file, because that would just take a lot of extra time. Being online, we kind of need to be aware of what's easy to communicate, but also a good learning experience. So next slide, please. With the summer course that Jay and I worked on, we did a survey research study kind of modeled in this action research idea that we were trying to hear from students along the way so that we could make changes and improve their experience throughout the term. So we did a start of term survey, a survey after the first midterm and after the second midterm. And I'm not going to go through all of our results here, just pick a few things you might find interesting. One is that at UBC, most of our students, well over 95% of them, had already participated in a two-stage exam in their first year courses. So they're familiar with this model already. They were also generally positive about group work and peer instruction and peer learning. So that's kind of where we were starting from when we jumped into doing this online. And after that first two-stage assessment for midterm 1, we did have some technical issues reported. This was in May, so people were still kind of figuring out Zoom and the internet and how to access these things. So we had technical issues by about 8% of the class, which was quite a bit. Most of them were about audio, maybe not being able to share their screen properly in Zoom, things like that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Hello?
You don't see it?
Oh, I don't. Does everyone else see it? Oh, there it is. Maybe it's just lagged. Okay. Thank you. So I was really curious because so much of the class had already done in-person two-stage assessments. I was really interested to see how students compared this, right? Did they think that the online two-stage exam was so awful and awkward that it was not worth any time at all? Or was it okay? Was it a reasonable thing to do? And I'm big on, is something reasonable and tolerated by the learners? And then also, of course, does it help their learning? But if they hate it and do not want to engage with it in any way, and we're just too constrained by the technology, then maybe we need to do something else, right? So I asked them to compare if these statements were more true online or more true in person or similar. So I asked things like effective learning experience, and if they kind of deferred to the person who they thought knew the most. And I had other questions about their group interactions. But one thing that stuck out at us is really this idea of having enough time to do what they needed to do, right? So they really, this green bar here on the left said that it was more true online, that they didn't feel they had enough time to do what they need to do. And I think all of us teaching online now know that things take longer than you think they're going to, right? That's kind of true in person as well, but online it seems to be really obvious that moving into groups doesn't just take turn to your neighbor. It takes setting up the breakout rooms, going to them, everybody arriving, and it's a thing. So that's one thing that we really changed between the first and second midterms is we built in lots of extra time. We kind of let go of that feeling that an exam has to be this very strict by the minute thing, and just, you know, set up the experience to be a little bit more flexible and relaxed. And I think that definitely helped. But what I hope you take away from this graph is really that we think students did feel quite favorably. Most of them said it was similar. And, you know, there were a few things that they said were more true in person, like being an effective learning experience, but that's not that surprising. I think all of us would say that, you know, being face-to-face for learning activities is easier in person as well. Okay, and I think I have 2 more slides. Next one, please. I just have a couple quotes from students from some of these surveys. So the first one is really highlighting that the student thought that working and talking in the breakout room in Zoom was an effective way to communicate. And they thought that it was administered really well. We asked lots of questions about that. And the student seems pretty enthusiastic. The second student, not so much. So this was a course where there wasn't a lot of group work. And so I think they had to organize themselves for quite a long time. They talked over each other. They weren't exactly sure like how to document their work. They were all kind of working on one paper document. And so I think this really highlights that need of giving students lots of practice, right? So do your group activities with similar technology to when you do the group assessment. And that's what I did in my intro chem this fall. We used Teams all the time to do group work. And so then they just replicated that in the 2-stage exam. And it was a very similar feel. Next slide. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of with this cognitive load of the technology. We know that everyone has kind of a limited capacity to think about what they need to do. And of course, we want them to think about the content and explain what they're doing to each other and so on. And so if we can reduce the cognitive load of the technology tools through familiarity, that should be great. Facilitating productive dialogue. This might come in a few different ways. One is that you may want to give students some suggestions for how to work with each other. So, you know, even recommend somebody to facilitate, make sure you hear from multiple people, whatever the guidelines are that you think are important, making those explicit can probably help make that dialogue, you know, really good. You can add on things like having them explain their answers, which maybe you do or do not do as much in the individual assessment, but again, try to get them to talking to each other and facilitating how to do that. And then, like I mentioned before, of course, all of this needs some time. And so feel free to cut down maybe the questions from the first stage of the assessment to open up some extra time, I think is a really good idea, especially in this online environment. So my conclusion is, from what we did in the summer study and my own experience with the midterm and final exam in my intro chem course, is I think that doing 2-stage assessments online is certainly possible. I think it's logistically challenging. We have to figure out what tools we need to use. But our students certainly think it's a reasonable thing to do. And for some of the same reasons as ever, of course, they like getting the immediate feedback. They like having a bit of their grade related to the group assignment grade. And they do find it fun. So somebody posted in the chat before that, you know, exams can be fun. And it's harder to see the energy online, of course, with them in individual breakout rooms. But I'll end by saying in face-to-face 2-stage exams, the energy is, you know, like no other, right? Because they're so invested in figuring out the questions and working with each other, that it's a really cool thing to see. And in one of the resources, we have a link to a video of a 2-stage exam that you can see if you're interested. So I'll stop there for now. Thanks. Am I turning it over to you, Phoebe?
To Alice.
Oh, to Alice.
Yes.
Okay.
So I have, for everybody, please start populating the chat with potential questions you might have for discussion. I have a short list of some questions that we will start with, and then we'll pull out other questions from the discussion. To begin with, we have a question for Martha. can you please elaborate more on the diagnostic exams?
Sure. So maybe I didn't give enough details. So those were, what I did was I chose 10 key concepts that I knew were going to be central to what the material that was going to show up on the midterm, and made 10 challenging multiple choice questions, you know, trying to populate it with those common misconceptions that students might have in those, as, you know, distractors in the answers. And then the students in person, because we've done this only in person effectively last year. They wrote the quiz in class, in person, on a piece of paper, and then passed it in. And then we passed out the if-add cards, and they did it again in their small groups. And then they get the immediate feedback. The other thing that's really nice about them doing it in person first is that if you've done it in person, you know how well you did, right? Like if I know like, oh, I really struggled with that, and I'm pretty sure I got like a 5 out of 10, but I know that, and you as my group member, you don't have any idea. Like I get that information because as we talk and we figure out what the answers are, right? And now I know I got a 5 out of 10, and I know that these 3 major topics were ones I really didn't understand. I need to focus my studying on, but nobody else knows that. And so that's one of the things that I liked about it as an instructor. They didn't mention that to me specifically, but they talked about how they thought it improved their studying for the midterm.
Alice, can I follow up on that?
Sure,
Because I was
go
the one who asked. I
Yes.
was the one who asked about the diagnostic exam. Do you do also the diagnostic exam in a 2-stage format or individual one? I did not understand.
Yeah, I did it as a 2-stage. Yeah, so it's like the class was on a Monday and a Wednesday, the midterm was on Wednesday, and we had the 2-stage diagnostic quiz. I called it diagnostic quiz, although my TAs tell me I should need a cooler name, that this name does not bring the people. So my TA said that's the reason they wouldn't come to do it online voluntarily last semester. So if you have ideas about a great name, I would love to hear them. But yeah, so they do it and then again, like it's a day and a half before the midterm, 2 days before the midterm, right? So if you're going to study, you're definitely going to study in those 2 days. And now you've got a little bit of data that can inform your studying. It was inspired by the paper that Jackie referenced by Lisa and Jane. I basically took their idea and turned it into like a pre-exam idea instead of a beginning of the semester idea.
Thank you, Martha.
You're welcome.
We also had a question about ideal group size, and I quickly jotted down in the chat that I found that anything larger than 4 did not work, but it would be interesting if the other panelists could maybe comment on the group size, please.
I almost always use 3 or 4, 4 preferable, 3 if the numbers don't work out that way. I just think it's enough heads to, you know, fill in the knowledge, but then not too many people so that people can really sit back and not participate or not have time to discuss.
Thank you, Jackie. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree with what you guys have said. I think even in the literature for most group exercises, it's recommended between 3 and 5. I prefer 3 to 4.
Yeah.
4, I find 4 is great for these.
Yeah, 4 works really well. All right, we'll move on to the next question. What happens for students with accommodations such as time and a half and other accommodations? And I will quickly start the answer. I believe it's an institutional, the institution has a lot to do. Every institution has different rules about accommodations. As I previously mentioned very briefly, my students with accommodations ask for accommodations only for the individual part, not for the group part. We have them starting the individual part earlier so they can finish the individual part by the time they need to join the group. And then they come in and they do the group part with everybody else. If they don't want the group part and if they cannot start earlier and they need to go past the time and they don't want the group part to be part of their grade, no problem, the group part will not be part of their grade. But I would like Martha and Jackie to, and I think Phoebe too, because yesterday we discussed something about averages. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess this is a challenge that a lot of us have. I have done kind of things that Alice described. One of the things I've done is have the students, if you have 3 or 4 students who are being accommodated, sometimes what you can do is wherever it is that they're doing the accommodations, they can follow it up with doing the group part. So I've done that. The other thing I've done is I've talked to the student and said, this is the way it's going to go. And what do you think? Do you want to come back and join us if that works for you? Do you want us to see if we can do something in the accommodation center? We'll try to pair you up or match you up with some other people who might be there. Or whatever the average group increase in grade is, I'll just give you that. And so I just give them a few options and let them choose.
Thank you. We have a question, and this is actually for Jackie. How do you model facilitating the dialogue?
I'm not exactly sure if I'm interpreting this correctly, but let me know. I think there's a couple things to help students have successful dialogue. One is it is preferable to have them all seeing the same thing and being able to interact with it. I think that's why we all like Google Docs so much, is because people are, you know what the others are seeing, so they have that opportunity. When we did the written exam where, one student submitted the answers on behalf of everyone, I just think it was much, much harder for them online to figure out what was going on. Face to face, fine, they can all look at one piece of paper, but it's much, much harder online. And then I just think even just giving basic guidelines and reminders, right? People know this, but with students who are maybe new to learning online, saying things like, make sure you hear from everyone, and I'm expecting you all to contribute. Just little things like that, I think, are good for instructors to say. I personally am not an expert at, different ways people engage in discourse to learn, although I come from it from a point of view that, of course, that discussion and talking about course content can do things like helping people reveal misconceptions. Students talking to each other, we know, is often more effective than them hearing an instructor explain something, because the students are at a similar level with similar ideas, but can point out, oh, maybe you're thinking about it like this, but really this helped me figure out what it is. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, so it was me, and yeah, I think I had never thought about that idea of encouraging, everyone to. I mean, you do encourage it, but actually modeling it somehow, or doing something to facilitate that that fair and discussion among group members.
And it is tricky because, I can't guarantee that all groups will have a stellar, smooth experience. I definitely, in my class in the fall, had, a few times where students did say, oh, not all of my group participated really. And of course, we know that in video conference, some people don't turn on their camera, and that's their right. I can only encourage it and say that it's nice if you turn on your camera, because it's easier to talk between you. The other thing I don't think has been mentioned yet is that technically when we do two-stage exams, that second stage is not required, because we almost always have a caveat where the group score can't bring down your overall score. So if that weighted average is actually lower than your individual score, we'll just take your individual score as your grade. So that means students can leave. They don't have to be there. And that there's a couple students who really don't want to do it. And, that's their right. They're adults, right? I let them choose that. So the assumption is that those who are there are open to learning and, open to the experience. Yeah, and I don't know of any data on this, but at least at UBC, where we have, lots of two-stage exams running in science, I do wonder if, by the time they get to third and fourth year, maybe they've really honed in those skills for, making decisions and working efficiently as a group and hearing from more people. That would be a really interesting research study. But I had first years, so they're, definitely new to this online university, new to university, things like that, right? And I don't know how much of that peer instruction they experience in high school, some for sure, but in a different context.
I was just going to jump in and add one small thing. So every panelist has said, I think pretty clearly, right? You want students to practice working together before you have an assessment situation. In the practice part of things in my courses, especially a sort of a case study focused course I teach in biotechnology, I assign roles. So I ask someone, I want you to be the facilitator of your group. I want you to be the reporter. And then I will describe, right? The facilitator will do things like check in on, has everyone contributed? And recently I popped into a breakout room and I heard one of the students say to the other one, like, hey there, Sam, we haven't heard from you. And I was like, oh, I'm so happy that, they're learning those skills. So I think, these are, sometimes we call these soft skills. These are not soft, right? These are the real work that you want a person to be able to do effectively when they go out into the world. And it's good for them to practice.
Thank you. Do we have time for another question, Phoebe? Yes.
Yes, we have till 2:30 by our schedule.
Okay, beautiful. I know you addressed this question in the chat, Phoebe, but so we can all discuss it. The question was, is the group part of the assessment always after the individual part of the assessment? And I think most of the literature indicates that the group part is after the individual part. I know of people, actually, I don't think she's here, Laura, has done the group part first.
Pallavi as well.
Pallavi as
she's
well?
responded here. You're here, right, Pallavi?
Yeah,
Yes, hello.
So if anybody else would like to comment on this, please go ahead.
Maybe I've never tried it myself. I have heard of several people who have. Pallavi, maybe do you have a minute to share why you chose to do it in this way?
Sure. So actually, so Alice just mentioned, I was actually co-teaching with Laura. So she and I are both instructors. We are both faculty lecturers at McGill. And I was co-teaching this course with her, where we did have a group exam. And in that case, it was for logistical reasons, actually, that we decided to go with the group exam first, because the exam was in a particular time window, and it worked with certain students' accommodations who wanted to take the group exam with the rest of the class and then leave and go to the access center where they could take the rest of the individual exam in the time that allowed them. So the timing worked in such a way that we did the group part first, and then we did the individual exam after. So it wasn't, and we had seen the literature and we had discussed this, but we first tried it out and received a pretty positive response based on this. And I think we had shared this. I think Laura had shared this because she was spearheading it. I was kind of facilitating it in that way. And we got a pretty positive response from students, but we haven't actually tried when we've done like with the same students. The only thing we ever tried was do the group exam and then do the individual exam, and not the other way. So we don't have that control sort of thing with the same set of students, but it worked out pretty well. And the students did, they liked. So there were some students who said that they got confused before they took the individual exam, talking about certain concepts, right? Like they were like, oh, we left that. But then there were a lot of students who were like, okay, it kind of, built my confidence and made me, the major comment that was there was, it got me relaxed before the individual portion. So, I chatted about it, it didn't feel like it was a proper exam. And then I went and I wrote this individual exam on my own. So yeah, so those were kind of the feedback that we got.
Thank you, Pallavi. And Jackie has shared an article in the chat about inverted two-stage exams. So thank you very much for that. No, you want 3-stage exams?
Group, individual, group, maybe overkill, but.
I just offer is that, as a part of the original, the early work on this was done with the concept of sort of priming, where it's along the lines of peer instruction, a la Eric Mazur, where that first run through the test is you're bringing to fore your own knowledge so that you can better articulate a response in the group setting. Although I'm really interested to read that paper that Jacqueline so thank you very much for that.
Can I ask something, Alice?
Sure.
Logistics wise, is it okay if you send all those links by email, or because that's not captured on the video, and right now I'm from my phone, so I cannot access any of them. So this is more.
Maybe we can add that one to our list of references. It's not really
Super,
a
thank
reference
you.
for our talk, but.
Yeah, and we're also saving the chat, so everything that is relevant from the chat will then appear with the talk. So, any other questions before we go into breakout sessions where we get to mull over certain issues? No. Sue, shall we be moving to?
Yeah, if you're ready. You're going to have 15 minutes, correct? In the breakout?
Correct, 15 minutes in the breakout sessions. Yes, please.
Great. So I'm opening the breakout rooms right now.
And
We
the link for the Google Doc is now in the chat.
And we can post it in our breakout room chats as well.
Perfect.
Janae and Liz, I assigned a breakout room for you too. So if you want to go, feel free to go.
Yeah, I was going to go. I was just making sure that everybody went. So I'm just checking with Norma because I do know who she is. Do you want to suspend the recording, Sue, while we're in the breakout rooms? Because I believe
And since do we have everybody back?
Yes.
we don't have
we're
Martha. Yeah, we don't have Martha's group, and we don't have Jacqueline's
Jackie's.
group.
It takes
Now
a
that we
while,
start-
but yeah.
Now we started having everybody back. Yeah.
Hello, we're back. Hello.
While we're all arriving back, if people want to scroll around the Google document and take a little walk through what some of the other groups wrote down, that would be great. A gallery walk, as they say.
So Jacqueline, because we did not finish what we were talking about, is it okay?
Yeah.
Because I know that at your institution, I love your institution. I work a lot with Peter. I'm sure you know Peter Ostachuk. And I believe, well, someone was saying that it started, I don't know if sociology, but in management, all of this, because you said sociology, right?
That's what I thought one of the original papers were, but there's absolutely non-science two-stage assessments. And maybe after this, we can have a peek at our reference list. And if we don't see that represented, we can pull in a few more. And then I think any of us, we have our emails on the slides, and I can try to find some people for others to talk to. So we have a slide reference that's kind of like colleagues with experience. So we're all from STEM, but we can connect people. So we're just all looking at the Google document.
Can I make a comment?
Please do.
Yes, you can.
I like the I lost my nerve, because I think that that's probably the biggest, what can we offer people who, attend something like this? I think it's probably to give them ways of trying something that it does take a lot of guts to try new pedagogical methods, right? So how can we help you get the nerve to do it? I know maybe that's what we need to really focus on, is not so much how to do it, because, how do you do it? You do it. But how do you get the nerve to do it? What are the biggest, what is the biggest challenge that those of you who do this have, and how did you get the nerve to do it?
Does anyone want to answer?
Well, the only reason I had the nerve to do it is because I had Liz behind me. So
Yeah, having support from
I think that,
saltees and colleagues really makes a difference.
you hit the nail on the head, Alice. Like, a community like Salties, and the conversation and hearing from other people, and hearing that, and also knowing that if you hit a bump, there's some smart colleague you can check in with. I think, the value of community in this big goal that we have to transform teaching is so important. It is at the heart of what we're doing. We have to build strong communities so we can support each other to make the change that we need.
How do we go about trying this in an environment where there are other teachers, in a department where there are other teachers who might not trust this or might not see the point of this, and they're not going to let you do it because maybe the marks are going to be compared with their students, and they might say, well, your students have an advantage to compare to ours. So is anybody on his own here, right, be able to implement it? I see Gregor is ready with an answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, it kind of touches on the statement before. One is to bring your fellow faculty members along to the exam. I've done this on 2 occasions, where they've asked me if they could come along to see how it is and how it's done. And the other thing is the actual average improvement of the exam grade is in the range of 2 to 3%. So we're not talking huge jumps. I also put a cap on improvement to avoid that very weak students ride the wave of the strong students in the group. So the improvement is capped at 5% in my 2-stage exams, and that helps as well to put some minds to rest that this would be an unfair advantage.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd also offer that starting off with low stakes assessments, quizzes, and that is a way in which, the marks really don't change. As Gregor said, I mean, honestly, 3% is a large change when you actually look at the shift in averages. The students who really do move up are the ones who are moving from 15% to 25%, but that's not going to really get them. That's not going to give them an unfair advantage. They're still in a situation in which they need a lot of work. On the other hand, the people who benefit from the interactivity are also the students who are at risk, and so you end up with that. I started off with very low stakes assessments, and I've moved to using it in my midterms, and it went smoothly. And I've had other teachers come into my classroom because of the noise. It's and actually, well, I'm going to try that. You know, so there's that, and you know, my marks on my midterms have not changed in any substantial way, in any statistically significant way. Is because it's a small difference. As 15% of the mark is on the group, and as a byproduct, though, by having to trim my longer assessments down to fit into a 2-stage format, I've really had to pare down my questions into a very reliable set. And it's improved my, you know, just doing that has improved the quality of my assessment. So that's another way that you can maybe bring others on board. But I mean, I would recommend trying it with a very low stakes assessments first of all, quizzes, just to see it and get a feel for that flow. The timing issue in a sort of more major assessment is a bit more of a stress for me as a teacher, and I'm glad I sort of had the experience of knowing how long it was going to take students to assemble themselves into groups and how long it was going to take to distribute the cards and stuff. But that was anyway. That was just my thoughts. Thank you.
This is really great discussion. I just want to mention one other thing I'm noticing from the Google Doc, just about the technology or doing it online and how to get over that, you know, initial doing this yourself. I love to see that there's lots of educational developers here and other people amongst your institutions. So I would encourage you, with whatever technology you're choosing, if you're going to launch this, run it by somebody who's done it. Just, this is how I'm going to set everything up. These are the settings I'm going to use. What do you think? And then you can head off some of those potential pitfalls that, you know, Zoom has come a long way as an example, but when we tried to do pre-assigned breakout rooms in the summer, it was really horrible, but that's kind of what was available then. And so, you know, the technology is always changing also. So that's another reason why the community is so great, is because people are learning all the time about these tools. So that's one thing I'd recommend. So for everyone, we are coming up to the end of our session, I believe, and I see that people still want to discuss. So how about I just show our last couple slides and then we do leave it for some more free discussion? Do people like that? Phoebe, Alice, Martha, yes, okay. One moment.
I'll say on one of the last slides that you're going to show as you do this, Jacqueline, our email addresses and names are on it. So if you do want to continue the discussion or ask us questions, the four of us are happy to discuss further outside of this time slot.
Yes.
And if you're looking for someone who does it outside of science, we can also try to connect you with people like that.
Okay, do you see the slides? My Zoom updated, just talking about all the technology changing all the time. Here it is. So we have, of course, the link to Saltese, the UBC blog from our Earth, Ocean, Atmospheric Science colleagues has some really great information there, including, I think, a video. This was the link to the online IFAT card. And one thing we did discuss is that there are other ways to do that. If your LMS is a bit clunky with that, we at UBC use a survey tool called Qualtrics. That's kind of our institutional tool. And there is actually a way to program a survey tool to give that second attempt or third attempt if needed. But again, you know, all students would kind of have to be screen sharing. So it's not exactly like it, but there are some other ways to do this. And then of course, sync up with some colleagues with experience. Going down to the slide with our emails, we will distribute this so you don't have to copy all those down. And then we have a nice list of some literature, which we will add to. So I think here we're going to add the paper about the inverted option, which is kind of cool. And then we'll scan this and pull a few examples from non-STEM as well. So that was all we really had. So now our session is officially over, but we're happy to continue with some informal discussion if people want. So thank you. I did see a hand before. Did it go down?
Well, I'm going to just jump in and say that, well, thank you very much. This was wonderful. And as the first of the series, we're really, really pleased. And you're also knowledgeable, and thank you for taking the time and preparing over the what is really a break for many people. And we also want to let everyone know that our intention is that we're going to continue this kind of collecting best practices about two-stage exams in particular, and trying to build that resource in a deeper way, both in terms of how to do it, the tools to help you do it, the people to help you do it, but also the data, be it anecdotal or real data, to give us a sense of why it's working, and and what needs to be tweaked. Things like the questions some of you asked about the group sizes, the timing of this. But I think what I learned the most by this session was that each of you are using it in slightly different for slightly different purposes. And that's what's really nice, the diagnostic, the priming, as Michael called it, Phoebe with the daily assessments, so that people get a sense of, this is metacognitive priming, and social, and I think Alice talked about that as well, the ways of making people get used to talking and talking with each other, and respecting the fact that the other person is a source of knowledge, not just the teacher. I think that's really important. And, and I think, Jackie, the perspectives that you're bringing about, it can be done as a final exam. So, I mean, we have this full range of how this two-stage exam, and to me, it's not just an exam or a test. I think it's what we're saying is it's a way of students learning many things, but utilizing some of the deep knowledge that we have about what learning requires. Learning requires this rehearsal and the recall of information, the use and the practice of the language, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to talk anymore, but let's just say, this is a wonderful start to some deep conversations about how we can do this. So no one's being brave and just jumping right in.
I think that's a great comment, Liz. It doesn't necessarily have to be an exam. It can be practice and collaboration and all kinds of things.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to mention, and it was a comment that so this came from Alice's experience. When Alice first started doing her two-stage exams, what she said to us was she went to she was in the library, or, by chance, she was in the library or went to the library, and the librarian told you what, Alice? Because I'll let you tell the story.
So we have posted the groups ahead of time, and students were studying in the library in the same group as they would be taking the group exam. So they were practicing, they bunched together. And again, I mean, to the power of them talking, last semester, the students that were together, they were doing problems together on visual classrooms, and they were coming to office hours together. So there's something, there's the magic of power, there's the magic of talking to each other and giving each other feedback. So it's working nicely.
I don't want to end on a negative note, but I think that is great when it happens. I attempted to forge some group identity in my online course. I'm not sure it really took off, but it could have. It was just invisible to me. So I set up some ways the students could communicate in teams, and again, had these persistent groups where they could talk to each other. But I feel like my students may have used other tools, like they just go to WhatsApp or Discord and communicate that way. So I haven't run my kind of end of term survey yet. I might ask them about that. Just like, did you ever communicate with your group, and was that useful or something? Because the ways that I suggested they do it, they didn't really use. So it's tough. It's tough. But I think it's worth doing, because I think especially online, students feel very disconnected. So we can play a role in maybe making smaller groups and giving them sort of permission to say, oh, hey, you are in my group. Do you want to study? As opposed to this large class of 100 people. But it's certainly easier to do that face-to-face for them, I think.
So what we've done at the beginning of the fall semester, we actually surveyed the students and we said, do you want us to set up groups? Do you want us to help you study together? And they all said, no, lay off us. Leave us alone. We know what we're doing. We have our own ways. Don't try too much. So then bringing it into a specific course like organic chemistry, bringing it into visual classrooms and assigning grades for the fact that they're actually giving feedback to each other forced us into communication. And then because they had to give feedback to each other and they started knowing each other, another type of group and another type of communication has happened. But I mean, I don't want to say that we kind of tricked them into it, but if we asked them, they didn't want it. But we kind of made them communicate anyway.
And task focused, right? Like you set up those activities really carefully. It wasn't vague, right? Mm-hmm.
No, it wasn't vague. It was this is the assignment. You have to give me the answer to the assignment, and then you have to give me one reason why this is right, and you have to give me one reason why it's wrong. And if it's not wrong, then you have to tell me how would you make it wrong. It's very focused, very targeted.
Mm. Maybe we're all done.
Yeah, so thanks again, and I'll let everyone say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very